Hello and welcome to the second episode of The View from Earthshine Tower. My name is Claire and I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit about independent bookstores, why they're important, how you can support them, and also talk a little bit about author events and specifically an author event that I was able to plan. But before we get started with that, last week I realized I had some questions because I didn't actually tell you what kind of tea I was drinking. So I had a few messages asking me about this tea. So this is my favorite tea house in Seattle, Tea Room. They're called the Perennial Tea Room. And the tea is black cherry. It's a summer blend. It's one of their summer blend specials. And because this is the last few weeks of summer, I'm still drinking a lot of fruit teas, and this is currently my favorite. Probably once we hit fall, I'll be back into my Earl Grey and my Russian Caravan. But for now, I'm drinking black cherry, which is a really excellent black tea. Okay, so before we get started with the main episode, I wanted to quickly talk about some cool book mail that I got and kind of plug my other series, which is Claire and Milo Talk About Books. So for episode 2 of Claire and Milo Talk About Books, Milo Michels, who is the events coordinator at the University Bookstore and also a bookseller, we are going to be bringing you the bookseller experience. So we are going to be taking you to our bookstores, giving you a quick tour, and giving you some bookseller recommendations in the style that we would at work, which is really exciting. And something that we'll talk about more in that episode that I'm going to talk a little bit about today is kind of the fun bookseller perks that we get as booksellers. And one of those is publishers will sometimes send us promotional materials, specifically advanced reading copies or ARCs or galleys of books that are unreleased. So I have 2 that I just got literally today, and I'm really excited about them, and I'm going to be going to at least one of the author events in September. So I just wanted to quickly introduce those to you now, and then I'll follow up with them in later episodes. The first book that I wanted to talk about is Nghi's The City and Glass. I'm so excited about this book. I'm incredibly excited about this book. So this is published by Tor.com and it releases on October the 1st. So you still have, I think at this point, about 5-6 weeks before it comes out. I was actually lucky enough to meet Nghi, and I see her the last time she came to Seattle. Actually, of course, Milo and I went to that event together, and we actually talk about it a little bit in episode 2 of Claire and Milo Talk About Books. But Nghi is a spectacular author, and a lot of my bookseller friends have been telling me that this is potentially, in their opinion, some of her very finest work, and I'm so excited. I can't wait to check this out. So kind of the tagline for it is a demon, an angel, a city. The City in Glass is both a brilliantly constructed history and an epic love story of death and resurrection, memory and transformation, redemption and desire, strong enough to reduce a world to ashes and remake it anew. So I will definitely be writing a review of this on my website. I will also, I'm sure, be talking about it in a later video. But this is, you can see it's quite a slender little novel. It's almost a novella. It looks like it's about 215 pages. I can't wait, and I can't wait to share my thoughts with you. So the second ARC I received was this Bringer of Dust, and I'm extremely excited about this. This is actually book 2 in the Talents trilogy, and it is by J.M. Miro, who I actually met back in 2022 when he came to Seattle. So he did an event at the University Bookstore for his first book called Ordinary Monsters. And I think the publisher describes this as a dark fantasy debut. I would describe it as kind of, dark fantasy, kind of Victorian gaslight fantasy. And it's one of my staff picks at work. And when I describe it to people, I tell them that it's sort of X-Men meets the Victorian era. It's really great. It's a big, thick book. It's about 650 pages, I think. So it's definitely for the reader who wants a big immersive fantasy series. And you can see that this is a first edition first printing. He's signed it here. And he's going to be back in Seattle at Third Place Books. So if any of you watched episode 1 of Claire and Milo Talk About Books, Milo and I went to see James S.A. Corey, the two authors that make up, so Daniel Abrahams and Ty Frank, who are the two authors that wrote The Expanse. They had a new book. That was Third Place Books, and we're going to be going back there for this one, Bringer of Dust. So, I'm so excited. I can't wait. So, the dark journey that began an ordinary monster surges forward, and the world of the dead is closer than you think. So, excellent. This series, a lot of fun, and I'm sure I'll be talking about it on a later video because I really want to get you caught up before we go to that event together. But this arrived for me in the mail. So this is Flatiron Books. So if you're looking for a great dark fantasy that's set in the Victorian era about kind of young people with essentially magical powers that are honestly more detrimental to them than they are helpful, this series is fantastic, and I absolutely can't wait to dive in. I just wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about independent bookstores, why they're important, and why you should support them. So an independent or an indie bookstore is a bookstore that is owned by an individual and not a big company or big corporation. And often there's one location, one brick and mortar location. Sometimes they have an online store, sometimes they have multiple locations, but they are defined by being owned independently. And independent bookstores were, throughout history, most bookstores have been independently owned. And it wasn't until the 1960s, with the rise of the shopping mall, that chain bookstores became more widely available, right? Because every mall had a bookstore. And in the 90s, with the rise of Amazon, who was also originally, Amazon was a bookseller. They only sold books till about 1998. Indie bookstores were in decline from the 90s onward because they were now having to compete with these big, giant retailers that were able to offer cheaper prices just because of how enormous they were. They could afford to pass more savings on to customers. So indie bookstores have been struggled pretty much from the 90s to the mid 2000s to be profitable. And then in 2009, the tide started to turn and indie bookstores started to become more popular. So there is I think he's an assistant professor at Harvard Business School, Dr. Ryan Rafaelli, wrote a fantastic article about why and how indie bookstores have made such a big comeback, and I will link it in this video if you are interested in the economics of running a bookstore, or just kind of the history of indie bookstores, or just if you find it interesting. I read the whole paper, I thought it was fascinating. But he set out to prove something that booksellers have known for a long time, which is that indie bookstores provide invisible benefits. So you're spending more money in an indie bookstore, but you are also gaining much more than you can get when you buy stuff online. And he eventually concluded that there are 3 C's, he calls them the 3 C's, that independent bookstores can offer that online retailers, they just can't. And those are community, convening, and curation. And I'm going to talk about all 3 of those. So anyone who has ever shopped or has a favorite local bookstore will be able to tell you that community is a really, really important part of what makes indie booksellers and indie bookstores so special. So when I moved to Seattle about 5 years ago, community was such a huge part of what I was seeking. And I'm one of those people that both my professional and my social life kind of revolves around the bookstore community. I think probably every really good close friend that I've made since moving to Seattle has directly been somebody that I've met through a bookstore, whether it was a bookseller event, author event, working at a bookstore. And like libraries, independent bookstores are part of your community. They're part of the fabric of your community. And they really, if you care about cultivating friendships and social groups through a bookstore, that is absolutely something that you can do. And this is something that is unique to indie bookstores. So community is a really big part of it. The second thing is curation. And in the second episode of Claire and Milo Talk About Books, which is the Bookseller experience, which will be dropping on Monday, a big part of what we're going to be doing is we are going to show you how indie bookstores, like the ones that we work at, really curate an experience for you, the customer. And because indie bookstores tend to be smaller, we can't stock everything. And honestly, you don't want us to stock everything. Curation is such an important experience when you go into an indie bookstore because it means that the booksellers and the owner are ordering books that they think are the very best in their genre. And, the booksellers have read them, they're excited to talk about them, and they're excited to help you find the perfect book. And because we've curated this specific experience for you, going into any indie bookstore, you will see that they have different staff picks. They have a different way of laying things out. Every single bookstore, indie bookstore that you go into is going to be curated to the taste of the staff and the owner. And even though I work in an indie bookstore, I spend a lot of time in other indie bookstores getting bookseller recommendations. And I think some of the best books I've ever read that I've been surprised by are books that I've bought and read on the recommendation of other booksellers. So community and curation are incredibly important. And the third one is convening. And this ties into author events and what we're going to be chatting about for the rest of the video. But independent bookstores allow members of the community to convene for things like book clubs, author readings, kids events, and they provide a place where like-minded people can come and enjoy events. And this convening is so important, and actually I'm a huge fan of author events. I advocate for people to attend them whenever they possibly can. I think this is something that Milo and I talked about in the first episode of Claire and Milo Talk About Books, but often bookseller events are free. There are some that you have to, they're book bundled, that you have to buy, like a copy of the book as like a ticket in order to be able to attend. But often these events are free and they're provided for you by these bookstores. And they're just a very unique way to participate in literary life. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about this, but this is the second year in a row that I have been directly involved with Silvia Moreno-Garcia's book launch. So this year is the 7th Veil of Salome. So this is a historical epic. It came out, I think, on August the 7th or the 9th. I think it was the 7th, actually. I'll have to check on that. And we hosted Silvia's book launch here in Seattle. It was a lot of fun. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what goes into planning a book event, planning a literary event, and just talking a little bit about Silvia and her work. Silvia Moreno-Garcia is a Canadian-Mexican author who primarily writes horror and dark fantasy, but her books defy genre. And honestly, all of her books are so different from each other. It's part of what makes her one of my favorite authors. So last year, I organized Silvia's book event for book launch for Silver Nitrate, which is a book that is set in Mexico City in the 1990s, and it's about occult cinema. And this book is excellent. It's really, really great. And we were very lucky. I guess Silvia had a good time in Seattle, but she was willing to come back this year for her launch of The 7th Veil of Salome. And this one is very different in tone to Silver Nitrate. So this is actually a historical epic that is kind of like a 1950 swords and sandals Hollywood epic. And it's also set, it kind of jumps back and forth in time from the 1950s to the biblical era. And it's about the lives of women and how they play out in very similar ways between the biblical era and the 1950s. This is my website, the Wardens of Earthshine Tower. You can find it at www.wardensofearthshine.com. My website features book reviews. It also has interviews with industry professionals and authors, as well as book giveaways. You can also find information about my editing services as well. Click on Library and it will take you to all the book reviews I've done so far, and you can browse and choose which ones are most interesting to you. You'll see here that The Seventh Veil of Salome is my featured book review. And if you click on it, it will take you to my full review. So I wanted to chat a little bit about kind of community programming and what it's like to plan a literary event, plan an author event. Because I've been encouraging you to attend these, and I thought it would be fun to talk about what it's like to plan one. So when you're planning an author event, I think the biggest thing is you have to be really, really organized. So last year when Silvia was here for Silver Nitrate, we were chatting and she was telling me that she was working on this book. And I was like, okay, so I know she has another book coming out. So I waited a few months and I emailed her publisher and I was like, hey, like Silvia told me that she was working on a new book. We would absolutely love to have her come back to Seattle. Is that something that she's interested in doing for her book launch? So that was great. And her publisher got back to me pretty quickly and was like, yes, Silvia would love to come back to Seattle. And I was able to actually meet her publicist at Emerald City Comic Con, who she gave me a copy of, a really early copy of Silvia's new book so I could read it. And from there, it was about figuring out, okay, what kind of venue do we want? Who do we want to partner with for this event? What kind of advertising are we going to do? So last year for Silver Nitrate, so the University Bookstore was the bookstore, the bookseller, and we also involved the Consulate of Mexico here in Washington State as part of their cultural programming, part of their MEXAM, which is like a summer programming that they promote for people to be able to attend events that have some kind of connection to Mexico or Mexican culture, or that features those with Mexican heritage. So that was really exciting. So we had the University Bookstore, the Consulate of Mexico, and last year we partnered with the Seattle Public Library. The Seattle Central Library specifically is where we hosted it because we had a lot of turnout. We had about 185, 200 people that showed up last year, so we had to have a venue that would accommodate those people. And yeah, that was really great. And this year we were hoping to also do exactly the same thing. We had the University Bookstore involved, the Consulate was on board, but the Seattle Central Library had a scheduling conflict, so that was kind of a no-go this year. And it's also why you want to be really organized, because, you know, if one of your venues says, I'm sorry, we can't do it, you want to give yourself enough time to find somewhere else. So a lot of Silvia's books have to do with film. Her last book, Silver Nitrate, was specifically about film. This book here, The Seventh Veil of Salome, is also about film. So I reached out to the Seattle International Film Festival, SIFF, in Seattle to see if we could host Silvia's book launch at one of their theaters. So we had a meeting with SIFF. It was great. It went really, really well. And they suggested the Egyptian cinema, which is their historic cinema, and we thought it would be a perfect fit for this kind of swords and sandals epic. So we got all that sorted out, and it just took a lot of time. It took more time than you would expect because SIFF is hugely busy. They have tons of film events that are lined up. So for them to make room for this was a big deal. So we now had our venue for this year. And another thing that's really, really, really important about planning an author event or a literary event is you have to advertise it really, really well, because if people don't know about it, they can't attend, they can't come, they won't show up. So we did a lot of social media advertising, all three of the partners involved, plus Silvia was also sharing on her social media. She was sharing the event, so we tried to give ourselves a couple of months. SIFF sent out emails, we were all pushing. Honestly, it was people mostly use social media these days, so that's kind of where we did all of our advertising. And yeah, it was fantastic. And then I had to find a speaker, so we ended up getting Consul Hector Ivan Godoy Prisky, who is the Consul of Mexico in Washington. So he was the host. So I got to write some suggested questions for him that I had to provide to to Silvia and also to him early so that they could go over it and chat a little bit. And I'm going to share a little bit of the event planning with you that we did on the day and walk you through what it's like to kind of do the behind the scenes stuff, pretty much from the afternoon all the way through the evening. So come along with me to Silvia's book launch. All right, this is Claire and Milo. We just got to the hotel and we're getting everything set up for Silvia's first signing for the first stop of her the Seventh Veil of Salome tour. So we are going to get all the books signed up, flapped, and ready to go. Are you ready?
So ready. So ready.
We're ready.
My bare
we forgot to bring we forgot to bring scissors.
Yeah, got nothing. Got our keys and our strength of will. We're just getting them ready so that she can sign right there. My ASMR fingers.
ASMR fingers. So the reason that we flap these is so that when Silvia starts signing them, she doesn't have to open it and find the page. We're just finding the page for her, and then she can just open them up and sign right where her name goes.
Yes, if you ever wonder at a signing where you should open your book to, it's the trick, because you're going to think it's the one with the title. It's the one with the author's name. Sometimes authors will like strike their name and then do their signature. It's kind of seems to be the vibe. Yeah. I'm scared to finish this book because I'm afraid it's going to break my heart.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it is, which is kind of ideal, I don't know. Should put a healthy fear of God in a person. And let me know if you want to like take a break, do wrist stretches.
Yeah, no worries.
The last thing we want is to be purveyors of carpal tunnel syndrome.
We met before the event at Silvia's hotel to have her sign some stock because we knew that time would be limited in the evening, and that meant those who were unable to attend the event and get a book signed would still be able to get a copy. This also ensures that the bookstore has signed copies at the store for the regular customers who are browsing. We arrived at the venue about 45 minutes before the event started so that we could unload the van and start making sure that everything was prepared and ready to go. The university bookstore team set up their table and book displays, and we made sure to have lots of copies of Silvia's new book, as well as her backlist and some of her more popular titles in Spanish. Head Consul Hector Godoy, who was hosting the event, arrived early, and then we opened the doors to the public, allowing them to purchase copies of Silvia's books and get themselves seated in the theater. It's really important when you're going to an author event that you buy at least one title from the bookstore that's hosting, because it supports the store and ensures that they are able to continue offering community author events like this one. We had a great turnout, and Silvia read an excerpt from her novel, and then we had a question period where Silvia discussed her writing process and answered audience questions about what inspired her to write the novel.
So can you tell us a little bit about that fascination with history of that time period that we have seen in your novels?
Yeah, I did another book that had to do with movies before this one. It was called Silver Nitrate. And that was in the 1990s, but it referenced movie production in Mexico City that was happening in like 1960, that kind of stuff. So the golden age of cinema that was happening in Mexico. That's a very different novel from this one. But one reason why it's interesting is because this is the time period when Hollywood is making a ton of movies and a ton of pictures which are going to be incredibly influential years later. We still remember some of the actors from that era. We still remember, I think, a lot of people, Marilyn Monroe, and a lot of people, James Dean. Even if they haven't seen a film with Marilyn Monroe, most people get some kind of reference out of it. So it's almost like some of the stars from these era have become ghosts that still haunt our culture. So that's just very interesting, the longevity of that. And the other thing is just the beauty of the cinema that was being created in that time period. You've got really great directors in Mexico and in other parts of the world. You've got Luis Buñuel making movies during this time period. But in Hollywood, you've also got Hitchcock, and you've got all these iconic actors. You've got Grace Kelly on the screen. You've got Pedro Infante singing and acting in Mexico. So it's just this yummy time period of artistic production where, despite the studio system and the Hays Code in many ways stifling a lot of stuff, still writers and actors find ways to tell stories. There's one story where Alfred Hitchcock in one movie, I don't remember if it was in To Catch a Thief or, I think it was in To Catch a Thief, you couldn't have a kiss on screen that lasted like a maximum of 8 seconds, something like that, otherwise the censors would tell you to chop it. So he makes this really long kiss by having them kiss for like the mandated number of seconds, and they stop and they start kissing again, and it goes on and on and on, and it lasts forever. And he gets around censorship that way. Or when he does Psycho, and so there's the iconic music and the knife going in and out, but you never see it actually going into anything. You just kind of picture it, and the sound and the editing makes you think something really violent is happening, but you don't really see that much on screen. And so it's a time period when there's a lot of kind of, stuff that's not so great about the industry, but when you see how people navigate that and sometimes get around some of those hurdles, it's just really kind of cool to see that.
We love reading your books during book club. It's really, it's amazing. Oh, actually, whatever. 113 through 110.
Cool. All right. First name, Taylor. Spell it for me.
Taylor.
Okay, and then we're going to do the second name. What's the second name? Okay, spell that for me.
Natalie.
There you go. All right, thank you. Have a great night.
All right, this has been the second episode of A View from Earthshine Tower. This is Sherman. So thank you so much for tuning in today and watching our video, and we'll see you next week. If you've enjoyed this and you're looking for more content, please check out Claire and Milo Talk About Books Episode 2, The Bookseller Experience, which will be dropping on this channel on Monday. Thank you so much, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Good job, buddy.